Once upon a time, before the world learned to write its memories, there was a city so proud, so radiant, that even the gods looked down in envy. They called it Troy, and for 10 long years its name would burn through the hearts of men, echoing across centuries as the world's first great story of war, love, and ruin. The flame flickers brighter now, revealing broken helmets, shattered spears, sand soaked red. They say history is written by the victors, but this was written in grief, by poets, by widows, by survivors who watched the sea swallow everything they ever knew. What began with a promise would end with a city in ashes. What began with love would end with a legend. This is the story of the Trojan War, the war that birthed heroes, defied gods, and left the world forever haunted by its fire. If you believe that myths are just stories, stay with us. Because what follows is not fantasy. It is humanity, burning bright and brutal at the dawn of history. Like, share, and subscribe, and journey with us into the fire where legend was born. The world is young. The wind carries salt and the promise of war. Waves crash against bronze-painted hulls that haven't yet been built. The sun rises slowly, spilling gold across the face of a restless sea, a mirror for everything beautiful and doomed. They call this the Age of Heroes, a time when men still dined with gods, when the sky felt close enough to touch, and every oath carried the weight of eternity. In this fragile light, power was measured not in wealth, but in honor, time, the sacred currency of pride. Across the waters of the Aegean lies a land of rugged mountains and narrow plains, Greece, a fractured mosaic of kingdoms. There is Mycenae, ruled by Agamemnon, proud, cold-eyed, and hungry for greatness. There is Sparta, where King Menelaus rules beside Helen, the woman poets would call the face that launched 1,000 ships. To the west sits Ithaca, where clever Odysseus weaves words sharper than any blade. And beyond them all, beyond the horizon, rises Troy, rich, fortified, beautiful, a city of gold and stone, standing like a dream between east and west. The Trojans call it Ilion. Traders from Egypt and Anatolia call it the Gate of the World. Every caravan that crosses from Asia to Europe passes through its walls. Every merchant who sails the Hellespont pays its toll. Behind those gates lives King Priam, aged but wise, his sons, princes in shining armor, none brighter than Hector, the protector of Troy. In his shadow walks Paris, the younger son, born beneath omens that whispered of fire. He is handsome, soft-spoken, yet restless, the kind of man who looks at the horizon and sees something calling his name. The world he lives in feels still for now, but history rarely stays still. It waits, it watches, and sometimes it moves through a single choice. On Mount Olympus, where clouds gather around marble peaks, the gods themselves are at odds. Zeus, the father of thunder, sits weary upon his throne. Hera, queen of heaven, burns with jealousy. Athena sharpens wisdom into vengeance, and Aphrodite, goddess of love, smiles in secret. A golden apple has been cast among them, marked for the fairest. It is a cruel jest, born of divine pride. 3 goddesses claim it, none will yield, and so they turn, as gods often do, to a mortal, one whose judgment will cost the world dearly. The choice falls to Paris, Prince of Troy. A man raised among shepherds, unaware that his decision will shatter empires. Each goddess offers him a gift. Hera promises power, Athena promises glory, and Aphrodite, with eyes like sunrise, promises love. It sounds harmless, it sounds human, but in a world where oaths are iron and beauty is divine, love is the most dangerous gift of all. Paris lifts the apple, his hand trembling. The wind stills. Aphrodite's smile is soft, and her words are honeyed. There is a woman in Sparta whose beauty rivals the dawn. Choose me, and she shall be yours. He does not yet know her name, but the die is cast. From that single moment, a fruit, a promise, a glance between God and man, destiny begins to move. The ships that will one day carry warriors across the sea are still being built. The swords that will one day gleam red with blood are still being forged. But already somewhere deep in time's current, the drums of war begin to beat. And when the wind carries that sound to Troy, it will change everything. Paris stands upon a high ridge overlooking the plains of Troy. The morning sun burns through the mist, and for a moment, the city below seems unreal. A place from a dream, gilded in amber light. He is no longer the forgotten shepherd he once was. The prophecy that once warned of his birth, that he would bring ruin to Troy, is long buried beneath the comfort of royal forgiveness. Yet fate does not forget. It only waits. How does destruction begin? Not with armies, not with swords, but with longing. The day he crowned Aphrodite as the fairest of all, Paris sealed his own story. The goddess, true to her promise, guided him westward, across seas that shimmered like molten gold, to a city called Sparta, where destiny awaited him in the form of a queen. When Paris arrived, King Menelaus welcomed him warmly. In the ancient world, hospitality was sacred, an oath between guest and host, older than any treaty. To betray it was to offend the gods themselves. But some oaths fade under the weight of desire. Helen moves through the hall like a vision. Her beauty is not merely physical. It seems to bend light, to draw attention without effort. Her voice, when she speaks, carries the calm of someone who has known too much admiration to trust any of it. Yet when she looks at Paris, something unspoken flickers between them. Recognition, perhaps, or the echo of a dream neither can place. Was it love or enchantment? Historians would argue for centuries. Poets would call it both. But in that moment, under the gaze of gods who watch and wait, none of it mattered. Only that she looked at him, and the world shifted. Days passed like falling leaves. Menelaus, bound by duty, left for Crete. And when he did, Paris remained behind, as guest, as stranger, as something more dangerous. The palace grew quiet. The air thickened with whispers. One evening, the sky burned with the color of fire. Paris and Helen stood upon the balcony overlooking the sea, and the silence between them became unbearable. "Do you believe," Paris asked, "that the gods can decide a man's heart?" Helen's answer came not in words, but in the slow turn of her gaze, half sorrow, half surrender. When the ships of Troy left Sparta's harbor, the world changed shape. The wind howled through their sails as if it, too, understood the weight of what was being done. Behind them, Sparta lay still, a city that had lost its queen. Ahead of them, Troy glimmered like a promise. In that moment, the line between right and wrong dissolved. Love had crossed into theft. Desire had become war. When Menelaus returned and found her gone, he said nothing at first. He simply stared across the empty halls, the echoes of her footsteps fading like the last light of day. And then he called upon his brother, Agamemnon, king of Mycenae, lord of the largest fleet in Greece. The oath once sworn by all the Greek kings, to defend the husband of Helen should she ever be stolen, now came due. It was time. Messengers rode through the night. Trumpets sounded from Argos to Ithaca. Across the Aegean, the greatest alliance the world had ever seen began to form. Not for gold, not for power, but for the return of one woman. And as the first fires of the forges lit the sky, the gods smiled. Because they knew, what men call love, history will call war. The sea has not yet seen such fury. From every port of Greece, ships begin to rise like shadows out of the mist, born not of wind, but of vengeance. King Menelaus has called upon the oath, an oath made years before, when Helen was yet unmarried, and every suitor in Greece desired her hand. To prevent bloodshed, her father, King Tyndareus, made them all swear one sacred vow, that whoever won Helen would be defended by all others, should anyone steal her away. They had sworn it before the gods. Now, the time for oaths had come due. In the great hall of Mycenae, beneath carved lions of stone, Menelaus stands beside his brother, Agamemnon, the High King. His voice is hoarse, his pride wounded, his words sharp as iron. "She was taken from me by deceit, from my table, from my hearth. If there is honor left among kings, let it be proven now." Agamemnon listens in silence, the firelight dancing across his armor. He has long waited for a reason, a cause that could unite the fractured lords of Greece under his command. And now the gods have delivered one. Then we sail, he says, not for love, for oath, for order, for Greece. One by one the kings are called. From Pylos comes wise Nestor, too old for battle yet bound by duty. From Salamis comes Ajax the great, towering grim, with strength said to match 10 men. From Thessaly comes Achilles, barely a man yet already a legend, son of the sea nymph Thetis, invincible save for one small place. And from Ithaca, reluctantly, comes Odysseus, dragged from his fields, his cunning mind already seeing the storm ahead. The beaches fill with warriors, shields gleam like the sun. The air smells of salt and iron. Mothers weep quietly as sons march toward the horizon. The gods themselves seem to lean closer, watching. Yet even as the alliance forms, the omens are uneasy. At Aulis, where the fleet gathers, the winds refuse to blow. The ships sit still, their sails limp, the sea unmoved. The priests whisper of Artemis, the goddess offended, demanding sacrifice. And Agamemnon, proud, unyielding, makes the darkest decision of his life. His daughter, Iphigenia, is brought forth. A promise is made that she will be married to Achilles. Instead, she is led to the altar. Her scream is carried away by the wind that suddenly returns, a wind strong enough to fill 1,000 sails. Thus the gods claim their due, and Greece, reborn in blood, began its march to Troy. The ocean roars beneath them as drums beat across the decks. The masts rise like forests, the sails like clouds of white fire. Each man aboard carries his own story. Some seek glory, others vengeance, others simply survival. But all are bound by one truth. There is no turning back. Behind them lies peace. Before them, a city of gold and a destiny written in flame. While the Greeks prepared for war, life within Troy went on untouched by rumor. A city gilded by sunlight and faith. Its towers caught the first blush of dawn each day, standing proud above the plains where the Scamander River wound like a silver thread. To the Trojans, the world beyond their gates was distant, almost unreal. The streets of Ilion were alive with merchants and soldiers, children playing near the gates, priests chanting before the temples of Apollo and Athena. The smell of roasted grain and burning incense mingled in the air. This was no barbaric kingdom. It was a jewel of civilization, a bridge between continents, and at its heart stood King Priam, wise and weary, a ruler who had seen both peace and prophecy. Around him gathered his sons, Hector his eldest, the city's defender known for his courage and discipline, Deiphobus fierce and loyal, and Paris returned at last from his journey to Sparta, with a woman beside him whose face would soon divide the world. The whispers began at once. Some said she was a gift of love, others, a curse of the gods. Even the air around her seemed charged with destiny. Queen Hecuba looked upon her and felt the weight of an old fear. Years ago, she had dreamed of giving birth to a burning torch, and been told that her son would bring Troy to ruin. Now that son had returned, carrying fire in his arms. In the marble courtyard, servants avoided her gaze. Priests offered prayers to ward off unseen wrath. And in the temple of Athena, the statue of the goddess seemed to glare with silent fury. Hector alone spoke truth to his brother. You have brought not love, but disaster. You have broken the laws of gods and men alike. Paris answered simply, I have brought what was promised. It was not defiance in his voice, only certainty. He believed the gods themselves had chosen him, and perhaps they had. Beyond the city's walls, far across the wine-dark sea, sails were rising like ghosts. The Greek armada moved with relentless purpose, an ocean of bronze and vengeance. Messengers began to arrive, breathless, from the coastal watchtowers. Ships, they said, hundreds of them, carrying kings. Troy's council gathered in haste. Priam stood before his generals, his voice steady yet shadowed. If this is to be war, then we must meet it as men, not as myths. The Trojans were not unprepared. Their walls were famed across the world, built, it was said, by the hands of gods. Within those ramparts, they had horses swift as the wind, archers trained from birth, and the favor of Apollo, who watched over the city like a guardian flame. But the question was not of strength, it was of fate. The gods had already chosen their sides. Athena and Hera, scorned by Paris, would stand with the Greeks. Aphrodite, bound by her promise, would shield Troy. And Zeus, the father of all, would look on in silence, for even he could not unwrite what had been written. That night, as the fires along the ramparts flickered against the stars, Helen stood beside Paris upon the walls. Below them, the plains stretched wide and silent, but in the far distance faint lights shimmered upon the sea. At first they looked like stars, then like torches, and then, unmistakably, the lanterns of ships. The 1,000 ships had come, and Troy, city of gold, no longer dreamed of peace. They said the horizon looked like fire, a line of light stretching from the edge of the world, not sunrise, but vengeance. The Greek armada had come. More than 1,000 ships, their sails swollen with the same wind that had carried Helen away. From afar, they looked like a swarm of white wings descending upon destiny. At the front sailed Agamemnon, high upon the prow of his flagship. His armor glinted like molten bronze beneath the dying light. Around him, warriors shouted to the gods, each man convinced his cause was just. The drums echoed across the waves, the heartbeat of a single, unstoppable will. Behind him, Menelaus stood silent. His jaw was set, his eyes fixed on the distant shore. He said little, for words could not contain the storm that churned inside him. When the Greeks spoke of honor, they did not mean mercy. Honor was a fire, bright, consuming, and hungry for proof. And now that fire sought Troy. Inside the city, the watchmen climbed the towers. From the battlements, they saw the horizon moving, not the slow rhythm of tides, but the living pulse of an army. Their shouts carried through the streets. "They are here! The ships are here!" Torches flared to life along the ramparts. The gates were sealed, the soldiers armed. The priests chanted hymns to Apollo, and the women of Troy gathered at the temples to pray. The whole city trembled, caught between fear and defiance. In the palace, Hector donned his armor, each plate hammered with care, each strap tightened by hands that knew what it meant. His wife, Andromache, watched in silence, her eyes filled with a sorrow older than war itself. "Every victory," she whispered, "is built on someone's grief." Hector kissed their child, Astyanax, and answered quietly, "If I must die, let it be defending what I love." Heroes do not choose their stories. They only choose how they meet them. The first of the ships struck sand like thunder. Warriors leapt into the surf, shields raised, spears gleaming. The sea boiled with movement, bronze against foam. The Greeks poured onto the beach, shouting the names of gods and kings. Among them stood Achilles, golden-haired, his face calm yet fierce, the embodiment of youth and wrath. He walked as if the waves themselves bowed to his will. To him, this was not vengeance, nor politics. It was destiny. He had been born for this. "Sing, muse," poets would one day write, "of the rage of Achilles," but that song had only just begun. The Trojans, led by Hector, charged from their gates with the force of a storm. Shields met shields, spears broke, cries filled the air. The first blood of the war was spilled upon the plain, not by gods, but by men who still believed they could win. The ground trembled, the sea roared, and above them, lightning cracked through a sky divided between rival deities. Zeus watched from Olympus, his face unreadable. Aphrodite whispered protection over Paris and Helen. Athena's eyes burned with vengeance, her hand guiding the Greeks. So began the first day of the war that would last 10 years, a war born of pride, bound by prophecy, and remembered forever, because when men and gods share the same battlefield, the world itself must bleed. The sea that had once carried love now carried only war. The first battle did not end the war. It began it. The Greeks had set foot upon Trojan soil, but the walls of Troy still towered untouched, unbroken, and unafraid. What they faced was not a single battle, but a test of endurance. A siege. The beach became a city of its own. Rows of tents stretched for miles. Fires burned day and night as blacksmiths hammered new weapons, priests offered sacrifices, and soldiers sharpened their blades by firelight. The smell of salt, smoke, and sweat filled the air, the scent of a war without end. At the center of the camp stood the command tent of Agamemnon, the High King, its entrance marked by golden shields. Inside, he ruled as though Greece itself sat upon that beach. Yet already, cracks began to show. Among the thousands of warriors, no two kings were equal. Pride was a weapon sharper than any sword, and in the shadows of victory, jealousy began to grow. Achilles, the brightest flame of Greece, had become both its strength and its danger. His speed was unmatched, his courage unbroken, his name already a legend whispered by both friend and foe. But to Agamemnon, he was a reminder that no man, not even a king, could command the will of destiny. When glory becomes a man's only language, obedience becomes his enemy. The Trojans, meanwhile, watched from behind their mighty walls. Each day, Hector led his soldiers to the gates, ready to meet the Greeks in open battle, then drew them back before dusk. He fought not for pride, but for preservation. Every life saved was a breath of hope for his city. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The fields before Troy became a graveyard of splintered chariots and fallen men. The plains of the Scamander ran red with blood that neither rain nor time could wash away. And yet the walls stood. Troy was not meant to fall easily. Its stones had been laid by gods. Poseidon and Apollo themselves, once bound to mortal service, had built its foundations. Every assault the Greeks launched broke against them like waves against cliffs. Frustration turned to fury. The Greeks burned the villages around Troy, cut down the trees of Mount Ida, and seized every trade route that fed the city. But still, Troy endured. Inside the walls, life continued, half normal, half nightmare. Children played in courtyards, unaware that the songs their mothers sang were prayers for survival. The markets grew silent, the harvest thinned, yet the spirit of Troy refused to yield. She can see the flicker of 1,000 flames across the plain, each one marking a man who has come to reclaim her. "Are they here for me?" she whispers. Paris, standing beside her, answers softly, "They are here because of what the gods desired, not what we did." But destiny never bears the weight alone. In her heart, Helen knew. The gods may have written the story, but it was mortal hands that carried the pen. The first year of war ended as it had begun, with stalemate. The Greeks held the beaches, the Trojans held the walls. Between them stretched the plains, a field of ghosts, silent except for the wind. Yet even in stillness, something darker stirred. Pride, rivalry, the kindling of a fire that would soon turn brother against brother. A war cannot last without tearing itself apart. And the gods, watching from above, began to whisper again. Now we descend into the heart of pride, where friendship burns and wrath is born. It had been years since the Greeks first set foot upon Trojan soil. Their numbers had not dwindled, their spirits had. Victory seemed eternal, yet always out of reach. And when men grow tired of war, they turn their anger not toward the enemy, but toward each other. Agamemnon sat in command, his pride as unyielding as his throne. The war had cost him dearly, men, treasure, time. He blamed the gods, he blamed the Trojans, but most of all he blamed Achilles, for Achilles had become too great, his victories too dazzling. The songs sung at night no longer praised Agamemnon, the High King, but the young warrior who fought like fire itself. And so, when fortune turned, when the Greeks captured a nearby city and took its treasures, Agamemnon found his moment. Among the spoils was a woman, Chryseis, daughter of a priest of Apollo. When her father came to ransom her, Agamemnon refused. But Apollo, angered by his priest's humiliation, struck the Greek camp with plague. Men fell sick. Fires burned to purify the air, but the stench of death only thickened. At last, Calchas, the seer, spoke. The god demands his daughter's return. Agamemnon's eyes darkened. He would obey, but not without pride's price. "If I must give her up," he said, "then I will take another, and I will take her from Achilles." That woman was Briseis, the captive given to Achilles, not a slave to him. but something gentler, something that made even wrath pause. When Agamemnon's men came to claim her, Achilles said nothing at first. He only watched, his knuckles whitening around his spear. Then, as the tent flap closed behind her, he spoke, his voice low, shaking with fury. "You have shamed me before all the Greeks. You are not a king, Agamemnon. You are a tyrant. May the gods make you beg for me before this war is through." He turned, stripped off his armor, and walked toward the sea. The greatest warrior of Greece laid down his arms, and in that silence, the war began to crumble. The Greeks fought on without him, but they were no longer an army. They were a crowd of men without faith. Hector's chariots thundered across the plains, driving them back to their ships. The fire of Troy burned brighter. The Greeks' pride dimmed. In the temple of Troy, Priam offered thanks to Apollo, who, on the walls, Helen watched the battle unfold, her eyes filled with the confusion of a woman who never wished for any of it. And in the Greek camp, Agamemnon sat in his tent, surrounded by silence and defeat. This is how war consumes itself, not by the sword, but by the pride of men who cannot kneel, even before fate. Beside Achilles sat his dearest companion, Patroclus, gentle, loyal, the heart that balanced his friend's fury. "Will you let them die without you?" Patroclus asked quietly. "They chose their path," Achilles replied. "Let them walk it." But even as he spoke, the sound of battle carried on the wind, the cries of men he had once led, the clash of swords that called his name in vain. And though he would not admit it, the sound cut deeper than any blade. In every man's heart there is a fire. For some, it burns for glory. For others, for love. But in Achilles, it burned for both, and it would soon consume him. The wrath of Achilles had begun. The days without Achilles were days of ruin. Without their greatest warrior, the Greeks began to crumble under the weight of Troy's relentless fury. The Trojans, led by Hector, prince, general, and guardian of his city, pressed forward with a strength that seemed blessed by the gods themselves. The walls of Troy had given birth to a storm. Each dawn its soldiers poured through the gates, sweeping across the plains like fire over dry grass. The Greeks fought, retreated, and bled. Their ships, lined up along the shore, began to smolder as Trojan torches reached their sails. Agamemnon prayed, Menelaus cursed, Odysseus plotted. But no plan, no prayer, no plea could replace the arm of Achilles. In his tent, the warrior remained silent, his spear untouched, his armor gleaming in the shadows like a ghost. He listened to the chaos outside but made no move. He had sworn not to fight, not for Agamemnon, not for Greece. Only Patroclus dared to enter his solitude. He found him by the sea again, where the waves whispered of battles past. "Achilles," he said softly, "our brothers are dying. The ships are burning. Will you still stay silent?" Achilles' eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. "They chose to fight without me. Let them face the gods' will." "But you are the gods' will," Patroclus answered, voice trembling. "If you will not fight, then lend me your armor. Let me go in your place. Let them think Achilles has returned, and their courage will rise again." Achilles looked at him, long, heavy, torn between pride and love. "Do not pursue them too far," he said at last. "Drive them from the ships, but do not go near the walls. The gods love you, Patroclus, but they will not spare you if you reach beyond fate." Patroclus smiled faintly, his eyes glimmering with a kind of peace Achilles no longer knew. "I will bring them hope," he whispered. When Patroclus rode out, wearing Achilles' armor, the Greeks roared as if a god had returned to them. The Trojans faltered, their courage shaken. Even Hector on the field saw the gleaming armor and felt his heart tremble, for he believed Achilles himself had come to end him. The battle raged like thunder. Patroclus struck down men by the dozen, his spear a streak of light in the storm. He drove the Trojans from the ships, turned the tide of despair into hope, but he did not stop. He reached the walls of Troy, the very line Achilles had forbidden him to cross. There, fate was waiting. Apollo, unseen but ever near, struck him from behind. His armor shattered, his strength faded, and as he staggered to his knees, Hector descended upon him, proud, furious, unstoppable. "Who are you that you challenge me in another man's skin?" Hector demanded. Patroclus tried to speak, but his breath was gone. "The end will come. For you too, Hector," he whispered, "and Achilles will find you." Then Hector's spear found his heart, and thus the gentle one fell, the friend who fought for love, not glory, the man who carried another's legend upon his shoulders. When word reached Achilles, he did not speak. He stood in silence for a long while, his eyes empty as the sea. Then, slowly, he knelt beside the body brought to him, the armor stripped, the face bloodied, yet still familiar. He touched the hand that once steadied his own. "You should have waited," he whispered. Then the sea wind rose, howling like a voice of grief, and the gods themselves turned away. In that moment, Achilles' heart died before his body ever could, and the war that began for a woman was now reborn, for vengeance. Now the story reaches its storm. Vengeance walks the earth, and even the gods tremble. The camp was silent. No song, no laughter, no sound but the wind moving through empty tents. Patroclus was gone. The laughter, the light, the heart of Achilles, and with him, the last chain that bound Achilles to mercy. He knelt by the body, his hair unbound, his voice a whisper torn between prayer and curse. "Zeus, grant me strength. Let the Trojans feel what I have felt." From the sea, his mother Thetis rose, her form like mist and moonlight. She placed her hand upon his shoulder. "My son, you will have your vengeance," she said softly. "But know this, your death will follow close behind." Achilles looked at her, eyes burning like coals. "Then let it come. Let me die once I have ended Hector." The gods themselves began to stir. Hephaestus forged new armor for Achilles, a shield that shimmered like the stars, its surface carved with the image of all creation. Cities, seas, heavens, and men. It was not just armor, it was destiny made visible. When Achilles returned to the camp, the soldiers stepped aside in awe. Even Agamemnon fell silent. Without a word, Achilles called for his chariot. The horses pawed the earth as if sensing what was to come. The dawn that followed was no ordinary dawn. It came blood-red, heavy with thunder. Achilles' wrath had awakened, and the gods themselves bent to watch. The Greeks followed, but none could match his speed. He tore through the Trojans like a storm tearing through fields of wheat. Every spear that rose fell broken. Every cry that rose ended in silence. He was not a man that day. He was vengeance made flesh. Even the river Scamander, swollen with blood, rose against him, its waters roaring. "Enough, son of Peleus. You have filled my depths with corpses." But Achilles raged even against nature itself. He leapt into the current, his sword flashing, driving back the river's tide, until the gods intervened to save the world from drowning in fury. There are moments when a man becomes more than human, when pain becomes a weapon and love becomes destruction. Achilles had become that moment. From the walls, Hector watched as his brothers fell, his friends slain, the fields burning beneath the Greeks' assault, and he knew what must come. "Bring me my armor," he said. "I will meet him." Priam, his father, clung to him, tears in his eyes. "Do not face him, my son. You are our hope. Stay behind the walls." But Hector only smiled faintly. A hope that hides is no hope at all. The two met upon the plain, the avenger and the protector. All the world seemed to hold its breath. Achilles' voice broke the silence. "You killed my friend." Hector's reply was steady. "He came wearing your armor, seeking my death. I gave him what he sought." For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Achilles lunged, a flash of bronze and fury. They circled, struck, deflected, struck again. Gods watching, mortals trembling. Hector fought bravely, but fate had already spoken. With a final thrust, Achilles' spear pierced his chest. Hector gasped, clutching the wound. "Remember me, Achilles," he said. "Your end will follow mine." Achilles' face showed no mercy. He tied Hector's body to his chariot and dragged it across the plain before the watching walls of Troy. Revenge is a poison that burns the hand which holds it. As Hector's body trailed in the dust, Achilles' glory began to rot into grief. Inside the city, Andromache screamed. Priam wept, and the gods turned away from the cruelty of men. Now we enter the quiet after the storm, where vengeance softens and humanity returns to the face of a warrior. The plain before Troy was silent. The cries of battle had faded. Only the wind whispered across the ashes. For 9 days, Hector's body lay outside the walls, bound to Achilles' chariot, his noble face marred, his honor dragged in the dust. And still, Achilles grieved. He sat beside the sea each night, staring into the black horizon. The waves spoke to him, but no voice answered his own. His vengeance had been satisfied, yet his heart remained hollow. For in every act of revenge there lies a shadow of emptiness, a reminder that pain cannot be unmade, only passed on. Then, on the 12th night, as the camp slept, an old man came through the darkness. He walked slowly, supported by trembling hands, his white hair hidden beneath a hood. He passed the guards unnoticed, or perhaps the gods had blinded them. When he entered Achilles' tent, Achilles looked up in surprise. Before him stood Priam, king of Troy, father of Hector. Priam fell to his knees. His voice, cracked with age and grief, broke the silence.
Achilles, remember your father. Think of him in his old age, alone, waiting for you, fearing that he will never see your face again. I have done what no man has done before. I have kissed the hands that killed my son.
For a long moment, Achilles said nothing. The tent seemed to hold its breath. Then, slowly, he rose and placed his hands upon Priam's shoulders. "Old man," he whispered, "you have broken my heart." In that moment, the warrior saw not an enemy, but a father. He saw his own reflection, the pain, the loss, the helplessness of love. And for the first time since Patroclus' death, Achilles wept. He lifted Priam to his feet and led him to where Hector's body lay. Together they washed it, the blood, the dust, the humiliation, until the Prince of Troy lay once more in the dignity of death. When dawn came, Achilles ordered the Greeks to cease fighting for 12 days, so Troy might mourn its son. He stood beside Priam as the old king departed with the chariot, carrying Hector home. No victory, no crown, no song of glory could match that moment. Two enemies united not by war, but by grief. Helen watched from the palace steps, tears glistening in her eyes. She had seen the faces of kings, warriors, and gods, but none as human as those who wept for Hector. Andromache, his wife, held their infant son in her arms, whispering to him words the wind carried away. "This is your father. Remember his name." The flames rose, and the smoke carried his soul toward the heavens. Troy's walls still stood, but the heart of the city had been laid to rest. From across the plains, Achilles watched the pyre burn. He felt no triumph, only silence. For he knew what Thetis had told him, that his time too was near. He had avenged his friend, made peace with his enemy, but he could not escape his fate. And so, beneath that same dawn sky, the last great piece of Achilles was written, not in the clash of swords, but in the trembling hands of a father and the tears of a sonless man. Now we enter the final act, where cunning replaces strength, where gods fall silent, and where the city of Troy meets its destined end. For 10 long years, the war had raged, 10 years of blood and dust, 10 years of dreams turned to ashes. The Greeks had come with 1,000 ships and 1,000 kings, yet the walls of Troy still stood, unbroken, defiant, eternal. The city had become a myth even in its own time. Its people hardened by loss, its soldiers forged by endless siege. The plains around it were silent now, littered with the remnants of war, broken spears, shattered helmets, and graves that outnumbered the living. Inside the city, life continued like an echo of the world before. Children played in the courtyards, merchants reopened their stalls, and the sound of music once again drifted through the marble streets. It was a peace built not on victory, but on exhaustion. Even the gods seemed to turn their faces away, weary of the blood they themselves had demanded. Among the Trojans, King Priam grew older, his eyes dimmed by sorrow, but still burning with pride. He had lost sons, friends, and the hope of seeing an end to this war, yet he still ruled with a heart that refused to yield. And above all, Troy's greatest shield remained its prince. Though Hector was gone, his name lingered like a blessing, a ghostly guardian whispering through the stones of the city. Helen, too, remained, the woman for whom the world had burned. Once cursed as the spark of this war, now she was its prisoner. She walked through the streets like a shadow of her former self, admired, resented, pitied. In her heart, she wondered, would the gods ever forgive her for a beauty she did not ask to bear? History is not written by choice. Sometimes it is written upon the backs of those who simply existed at the wrong moment. Across the plains, the Greeks were broken. Their numbers had dwindled, their morale vanished. Even Achilles was gone, slain by a single arrow to the heel, guided by Apollo's unseen hand. He who could not be defeated by men had fallen to the will of the gods. Agamemnon's eyes had grown hollow, Menelaus's rage dimmed into silence, and Odysseus, the man of many minds, sat apart from them all, watching, thinking. Odysseus, king of Ithaca, the man of reason among men of rage. He had seen too much death, too much pride, too many sons buried for the sake of one stolen bride, and so he began to wonder, if Troy cannot be conquered by strength, can it be conquered by deceit? He called together the remaining kings under a moonless sky. Their torches flickered as he spoke. Let us not strike Troy's walls. Let us strike its heart. The others watched him, weary yet curious. What do you mean? Asked Menelaus. Odysseus smiled faintly, a dangerous kind of calm. We will make them believe we have gone. And thus, a plan began to take form, not of war, but of illusion. A plan that would turn the tide of history itself. Narrator, rising cinematic. The Greeks, who had conquered with sword and flame, would now conquer with silence and wood, a symbol of peace that carried the seed of ruin. While the Trojans slept, the Greeks worked. Axes bit into trees, saws cut through timber, and hammers rang softly in the dark. Piece by piece they built the most famous deception the world would ever know. The gods watched, some with amusement, others with dread, for they knew what men did not, that inside that wooden shell, destiny was being carved. And when dawn came, only one thing stood upon the beach, a vast wooden horse, towering and silent, waiting for belief to open the gates of Troy. Now, the deception is complete. A false peace, a wooden gift, and the beginning of the end for the city of gold. Narrator, measured, quiet. The plain that once roared with war was now silent. The Greeks were gone. Their ships, 1,000 of them, had vanished beyond the horizon, leaving behind only ashes and a single monument of wood. The Trojans awoke to stillness. At first they could not believe their eyes. Where once an army had camped for 10 years, now there was nothing but emptiness, and a statue so vast, so strange, it seemed both a miracle and a curse. From the walls of Troy, men shouted in disbelief. The scouts reported no trace of ships, no sign of Greeks, only the sea stretching endlessly toward the west. It was the kind of silence that feels like a whisper, the kind that hides a secret. The people flooded out of the gates. Some laughed, some wept. Others touched the wooden surface as though it were sacred. Upon its side, carved in Greek letters, were the words, "To Athena, in gratitude for safe passage home. May this gift appease her wrath." A gift to the goddess of wisdom and war, left as an offering or a warning. Then came the voices of doubt. Among them was Laocoon, a priest of Apollo, his eyes sharp and wary. He stepped forward and shouted so that all could hear, "Fools, do you not see deceit in every Greek breath? Do you think they would leave without victory? Beware of Greeks, even when they bear gifts." His words echoed through the valley. The laughter stopped. Truth often sounds like madness when spoken to those who crave peace. Laocoon took a spear and hurled it into the horse's flank. It struck deep, and for a moment the sound that came from within, a faint metallic thud, went unnoticed in the noise of the crowd, but the gods, cruel in their irony, had other plans. As the priest turned away, two great serpents rose from the sea, their bodies glistening with salt and venom. They struck him down before the people's eyes, crushing him and his sons in coils of divine fury. The Trojans froze. To them, it was a sign, a punishment from the gods for daring to doubt the sacred gift. And so their fear became faith. The gods did not deceive them. Their own hope did. As night fell, the horse was dragged through the gates of Troy. The sound of wheels creaked against the stones, echoing like the heartbeat of doom. The people sang and danced around it, praising Athena for deliverance, celebrating an end to suffering. Even Helen, from her balcony, watched the celebration. Her eyes, however, were not filled with joy. Something in her heart whispered that peace had not yet come. She turned to the shadows and murmured, "They are not gone, I can feel it." But no one listened to the woman whom gods had cursed and men had blamed. And so, the city slept beneath stars that burned like watchful eyes. Behind the sealed planks of the wooden horse, Greek warriors held their breath, waiting for night to fall deeper still. Odysseus was among them, crouched in silence, his sword drawn. In that suffocating darkness, he could hear the heartbeat of destiny and the distant drums of Troy's final dawn. It is not always the sword that ends an empire. Sometimes it is the gift left at its gate. Now the night falls, and Troy faces the reckoning. Flames, betrayal, and the screams of a city. The people of Troy slept unaware of what waited within the wooden horse. What they believed a gift, a symbol of peace, was a prison of war, hollow, dark, and breathing with the hearts of men who would soon undo everything. Inside, the warriors held their breath. Odysseus, cunning and calm, whispered orders in the darkness. Each man knew his role. The plan that had taken months to shape now depended on one heartbeat: the cities. Even the gods held their breath that night. Some in silence, some with cruel amusement. Athena, who had guided their deception, watched from the heavens, her eyes cold. Outside, Troy slept. Children dreamed of fathers long dead. Merchants dreamed of coin, and soldiers dreamed of home. No one heard the soft scrape of wood against stone, the quiet sighs of men waiting to strike. Then, as the hour deepened, the Greeks climbed from the belly of the horse. Their armor gleamed in the torchlight, their swords raised, eyes burning with anticipation. One by one, they slipped through the streets like shadows of the night, moving silently toward the gates. It was a city of gold, yes, but it was also a city asleep. And asleep cities are easy to conquer. The gates opened for them, not by force, but by the hand of those who celebrated the false victory. The Trojans had let their joy blind their eyes. And so, the Greeks flooded inside, swift as lightning, silent as death. Panic erupted. Trojans ran through streets they had known all their lives, only to meet spears and swords. Temples that had stood for centuries were set ablaze. Palaces, home to kings and queens, to children and elders, became pyres. The fire did not discriminate. It consumed the innocent and the guilty alike. The city's gold and marble reflected the flames, turning night into a river of molten light. Inside the palace, Priam tried to rally his sons and defenders. Horror had replaced hope. He watched as men he had trained since childhood fell before the invaders. And though he fought with courage, the tide was unstoppable. The Greeks moved with deadly precision. Every corner, every alley, every hall was cleared. Menelaus, Agamemnon, and Odysseus led their warriors with a grim determination. And in the shadows, the young Neoptolemus, son of Achilles, carved a path of vengeance, seeking the heirs of those who had once resisted his father. By the night's end, Troy was a city no more. Its walls still stood, but they enclosed nothing but fire, smoke, and echoes of a world that had been. Even Helen, once the cause of all this war, fled with the Greeks. Her eyes, now hollow, saw not triumph but ruin. She had been a spark, yes, but the conflagration belonged to men and to the gods who guided them. When dawn approached, the city lay in ashes. The cries of the living mingled with the silence of the dead. The gods watched. The earth smoked, and history remembered. Cities rise and fall, kings live and die. But the story of Troy, of love, pride, vengeance, and folly, would echo through eternity. Now the final hours of Troy unfold: despair, escape, and the grim silence of a fallen city. The city that had withstood 10 years of war now lay broken in a single night. Its walls, once symbols of power and pride, enclosed only ruin. The streets were littered with bodies, abandoned weapons, and the remnants of a life that had ended too soon. Among the chaos, the last defenders of Troy fought bravely. Old men, young boys, and soldiers who had survived a decade of siege now faced death with little hope. Priam, king of Troy, sought the palace, hoping to protect what little remained of his family. But even a king cannot command against fate itself. There, in the halls of his ancestors, Priam met Neoptolemus, the son of Achilles. The young warrior's eyes were cold, filled with inherited wrath. Priam fell to his knees, pleading, "Have mercy, my son. Spare an old man who has known more loss than life." But mercy was gone. Neoptolemus struck him down. The last king of Troy, whose life had spanned generations, was no more. The blood of royalty stained the marble floors, and silence claimed the halls. And so, the legacy of a kingdom ended not in glory, but in fire and shadow. The blood of fathers and sons mixed, a final offering to the wrath of men and the indifference of gods. Outside the palace, women and children tried to flee. Andromache, Hector's widow, clutched her infant son, her face pale with terror. But the Greeks were everywhere. There was no escape. Astyanax was torn from her arms, his future swallowed by fear and vengeance. Helen, walking among the Greeks, felt no triumph, only emptiness. She had been the cause, yet the world had been lost around her. The Greeks, methodical in their cruelty, spared few. They set fire to temples, looted treasures, and dragged the remaining population to the ships. Odysseus, ever cunning, guided the survivors, those useful for ransom or labor, toward their new fates. The river Scamander, once witness to the flow of countless battles, now carried the smoke and ash of Troy into the sea. By morning, Troy existed only in memory. Its name, its walls, its princes and heroes, reduced to stories, whispered by the wind. Cities fall not always because of might, but because of trust misplaced, pride unchecked, and the cunning of those who wait for night to conceal their truth. And yet, even in ruin, the story endured. The names of Hector, Achilles, Priam, and Helen would echo through generations. Songs would be sung, poets would write, and men would remember that a city of gold had been lost to wood, fire, and deceit. The fall of Troy was not the end of war, nor the end of grief. It was a lesson written in blood, fire, and shadow, a reminder that glory and ruin are separated only by choice, chance, and fate. The war that began with love and pride ended in smoke and silence, and the world for a moment held its breath. Now we step into the echoes of war, where Troy is gone, but its story shapes generations. The war was over. The city of Troy had fallen, yet the victory felt hollow. The Greeks returned to their homes, but none returned unchanged. Every man carried the weight of 10 years of bloodshed, every survivor the memory of friends lost, and every king the shadow of choices that could never be undone. The stories of Troy spread like wildfire across the Greek world. Poets sang of Achilles' wrath, of Hector's courage, of Patroclus' sacrifice. Children learned the names of heroes as if they were legends, though the scars of war were very real. And yet, the greatest lessons were not of heroism, but of consequence. Pride, love, vengeance. These had driven men to destroy a city of gold, yet none had truly gained from it. In Mycenae and Sparta, the kings received their returning men. Some were heroes, celebrated with songs and feasts. Others were hollowed, their minds haunted by what they had seen, and even those hailed as victors carried the silence of the dead within them. Odysseus, whose cunning had won the war, set sail for Ithaca. His journey would take years, filled with trials that mirrored the war he had just survived, proof that even triumph cannot shield a man from fate's designs. Meanwhile, Troy's ruins became a lesson for the world. Other cities, upon hearing of its destruction, fortified their walls, trained their soldiers, and prayed to the gods for favor. The story of Troy passed into legend, inspiring awe, fear, and reflection for generations to come. History remembers the fallen, not always the victors. Hector became immortal in song. Achilles, though mighty, died young. Priam, the king who wept over the body of his son, became the symbol of the tragedy of leadership. And Helen, the woman whose face ignited 1,000 ships, remained both muse and curse in the minds of men. The Trojan War reshaped the Greek world. It influenced politics, alliances, and the rise of kingdoms. Heroes' names became ideals to emulate, cautionary tales to heed. The memory of Troy lingered in art, architecture, and oral tradition, a bridge from myth to history. And beyond Greece, the story endured. The echoes of Troy reached the shores of the Mediterranean, inspiring generations of leaders, thinkers, and warriors. The war was a lesson in human nature, a mirror of ambition and folly, of love and hatred, of the price paid when pride outweighs wisdom. In the end, the city of Troy was gone, but its story remained, eternal. A reminder that men build, destroy, love, and rage, but history remembers all. And even in ruin, there is a voice that whispers across time. Remember what was lost, remember what was fought for, and learn. Now we step into the final reflection, where the story of Troy becomes a mirror for humanity, and its lessons echo through time. The smoke has faded, the fires are no more. The city of Troy exists now only in memory, in song, in story. Yet its lessons are eternal. We tell this story not merely to remember the wars, the battles, the heroes. We tell it to understand ourselves, to understand the fragile nature of peace, the danger of pride, the cost of vengeance, and the fleeting power of desire. Hector, who fought for honor and his people, fell not in shame, but in bravery. Achilles, whose rage reshaped the battlefield, discovered that even victory cannot bring peace to a grieving heart. Priam, the father who bowed before the killer of his son, reminded us that even in loss, compassion has the power to transcend hatred. And Helen, who was both muse and catalyst, showed that beauty without wisdom can ignite the world's fury. History is shaped not only by the deeds of the mighty, but by choices small and great, choices driven by love, fear, pride, and folly. Troy teaches us that the grandeur of walls, the might of armies, and the brilliance of warriors are temporary. Only the memory of courage, compassion, and consequence endures. And so the Trojan War is more than a story of Greeks and Trojans. It is a story of humanity, a mirror in which every generation can see its own struggle, between desire and duty, vengeance and mercy, ambition and wisdom. In the modern world, the echoes of Troy resonate still. Its lessons ripple through history, shaping wars, diplomacy, art, and philosophy. Even today, leaders, poets, and thinkers draw upon its stories, a testament to the enduring power of myth. We remember Troy not to glorify its fall, but to understand the price of pride. We remember its heroes not to worship them, but to learn from them. And we remember its destruction not to mourn, but to recognize that the choices of men can create worlds and destroy them. The wooden horse remains a symbol, a warning and a lesson, a reminder that appearances deceive, that cleverness can mask cruelty, and that vigilance is the eternal price of freedom. And as the sun dips below the horizon, as the waves carry whispers of the past, we hear the silent voice of Troy. Learn from us, remember us, and let the lessons of war guide the hearts of those who walk in peace. The war ended, the city fell, the heroes passed, yet the story endures, immortal. And in that story, the world finds both warning and wisdom, sorrow and beauty, tragedy and triumph.